Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. In today's video, I'll be using Jaded Blossom's brand new June release. Jaded Blossom has a fun new release that's now available, and if you are interested, I do have links in the description box below. I'll start off by showing you all of the items in the release, then I'll make a few cards using the new products. First up, we have a stencil called Handcuff Stencil. This is the freebie you'll receive if you purchase at least $50 worth of product, and one item must be from the new release. This is for a limited time and while supplies last. The next item is another stencil set. This is called Badge Stencil, and there are 2 stencil layers. And you can use this stencil to create your own pattern paper. The first sentiment set is called Gnomeland Security, and there are coordinating outline dies. Lots of really fun sentiments that'll work well with the dies and stencils in the new release. A few of the sentiments are, my favorite crime fighter, you are an officer like Gnome other, you gnome, I back the blue, whoop whoop, it's your birthday. And I'll flip over the stamp and die so you can see the actual size. There's another stamp set, this one's called Arrest Me, and it also has the coordinating outline dies. I love having the dies to go with the sentiments. What's really fun about this set, there are police and also firefighter sentiments. So if you purchased the firefighter products released last month, you may want to pick up this set. A few of the sentiments, you're hotter than a 5-alarm fire, arrest me, I'm here to steal your heart, happy birthday, party until the cops show up. Now moving on to the die sets. Last month Jaded Blossom released a fire truck, and this month they have a police cruiser. Now you will need the original car die cruiser set since the police cruiser is an add-on. The new police cruiser add-on set, it doesn't have all of the parts to fully assemble the vehicle. There's no wheels, it doesn't have the main body, plus several other pieces. The next die set is Gnome Die's Motorcycle Cop add-on. Now this is another one that you do need the original motorcycle die set since you don't have all of the pieces needed to assemble a motorcycle with this set. But this set also has the helmet for the police officer. And for my cards in this video, I will be assembling the motorcycle and also the police cruiser. The final die set in the June release is a Gnome die set. This one's called Police Add-ons. There are 2 new hats. There's the police officer hat and also the sheriff or deputy hat. And I think that hat also works for state patrol. There are also headphones with a mic. The gnome can hold a radio, handcuffs, police light, a baton. There are 3 different badges, and there's also an image that looks like a ticket. So no speeding when the gnomes are around because you might get a ticket. The pattern paper I'll be using for my cards is from Echo Park. This is the First Responder collection. I used this same collection last month for the firefighter cards. It's a great collection for first responder cards since it has firefighters, police, and also medical. I bought this new storage pocket designed to hold 6x6 paper pads and their scraps, so I thought I would try it out. This is called Easy to Organize. It's a totally Tiffany product. Since the Echo Park paper pads have the hole at the top and about an extra ½ inch, I had to turn it on the side in order to slide it into that front pocket. But otherwise it works out really well and it holds all those little paper scraps. The set I purchased includes 3 folders. And if you are interested, I will add a link in the description box. So let's go ahead and get started with card number 1. I'm using a tone-on-tone dark blue pattern paper for the background. I cut a 1½ inch strip of this stripe paper, and I'll adhere that at the very bottom. For a little bit of separation between the two pattern papers, I'm adding a Love from Lizzie peel off. And you can see this sheet is almost gone. This is the pinstripe style in black. Since I am covering up the very center of the card, I'm able to use some of those small scraps. I'll wrap the ends around the back, layer this piece on some black cardstock, put ATG tape on the back, and add my card front onto a card base, leaving 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. Using 2 more pattern papers from the First Responder collection, I cut them out using Jaded Blossom's Stylized Rectangle dies. For the main rectangle piece, I used a blue tone-on-tone grid design, and for a 1-inch strip at the very bottom, I'm using the yellow tone-on-tone grid style. I'll adhere the yellow strip at the very bottom, making sure to line it up with the blue rectangle die cut. Then I'll put glue on the back and adhere the stylized rectangle on the center of my card. And I will place a large acrylic block on top for some added weight to make sure everything lays nice and flat. Now I'll start assembling the Gnome, Sheriff, or Deputy. I've already attached the beard, mustache, and shoes on one of the Gnome outline pieces. And I did put foam dimension on the back of the Gnome. I should have waited, since now I'll need to remove the foam pieces that are at the top area of the beard. Since the sheriff hat isn't the same size as the traditional gnome hat, I'll simply trim off that section. I'll put glue on the back of the beard, just at the very top, and adhere the body of the gnome onto the hat. Before I finish assembling the hat, I'll attach the nose. The hat has several pieces. The main brim, the very top, and I used dark brown cardstock for both of those pieces. For the band of the hat, I cut it out from yellow cardstock. And for the sheriff's badge, I used some gold mirror satin cardstock. Just put glue on the back and adhere it right on the front of the hat. The deputy will be holding a pair of handcuffs. I use white cardstock for that background piece and silver mirror cardstock for all the other layers. And you could just cut out the one piece from the silver mirror cardstock, but by having all the other layers, it really adds more detail to the image. The final 2 pieces for the handcuff are just half of that cuff area. Put glue on the back and adhere them in place. And since I am gluing all these specialty cardstock pieces together, it will take just a little bit longer for that glue to fully adhere. Now I'll adhere the gnome's hands onto the handcuffs. Put one on the right side, the other on the left. And I'm adding just a little bit of Barely Art glue behind the fingers and then adhering it onto the handcuffs. Behind the back portion of the hands, I will add some foam dimension. And I'm adding 2 pieces of 1mm foam dimension since there are lots of layers on those handcuffs. I'll also add a little bit of foam dimension behind the wider areas of the handcuffs. I'm using Scrapbook.com's small squares. This is their 1mm thickness. And I am cutting some of the squares in half. That way I have a smaller piece of foam to fit behind those tiny areas. I donate a lot of my cards and I do tend to keep them fairly flat. That way the organization doesn't have to pay any additional postage to mail them. But when it comes to my gnome cards, I use all kinds of layers and foam dimension. After removing the release paper, I'll adhere the handcuffs right in front of the deputy. Now I'll flip him over, put more foam dimension on the back, remove the release paper, and add the gnome on the left side of the card. Want to make sure to leave enough space in the upper right hand corner for the sentiment. And I've already stamped and cut out the sentiment. It would be a crime to not say thank you. I will pop up the sentiment using more foam dimension. This time I'm using the large foam squares from Scrapbook.com, the 1mm thickness. I'll remove the release paper and adhere the sentiment in the upper right-hand corner. For embellishments, I'm using Jaded Blossom's Embellishment Cluster Die set. This is the set I requested. I'm using just the medium-sized star, and I cut it out from the blue tone-on-tone pattern paper. I'll put 3 stars around the sentiment and 2 in the lower left-hand corner. And I am using scrapbook.com's Craft Pro Pick tool, the wax tip end, to pick up those small stars. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 1. For card number 2, I'll be making a police officer gnome. I selected 3 pattern papers from the First Responder collection. For the very background, it has lots of police images. There's badges, stars, hats, stop signs. I cut out a 2-inch strip from the police badge paper, and I'll be layering it on some blue pattern paper that has small plus signs or maybe they're little star images. For some separation between the 2 pieces, I'll add a Love from Lizzie peel off. This is the pinstripe style in the silver mirror color. I'm using the narrowest width. I wrap the ends of the peel offs around the back, attach the pattern paper strip on the center of the background, and once I did that, I realized I cut that center piece just a little bit longer than the background piece. So I did use my scissors to trim off the extra. I'll layer the background panel on more pattern paper. This is the yellow grid tone-on-tone. You can see from the center I did cut out a piece, and I'll be using that here a little bit later. Then I'll layer this piece on some black cardstock. Put ATG tape on the back and add my card front onto a card base. I'll be adding a large stitch circle die cut, and I did use some white shimmer cardstock for the circle. I've already stamped and cut out the sentiment, "You are an officer like Gnome other." Using the same outline die, I cut out a second piece from the same yellow tone-on-tone pattern paper for that background layer. So here's that piece that I cut out from the center. I'll set aside the sentiment for now and start assembling the police officer. I've already assembled most of the officer. I'm using one of the newer beard styles. If you're looking for a variety of different skin tones for your gnomes, Jaded Blossom does sell a skin tone paper pad, and I do have a link in the description box. For the police officer hat, I used 3 different shades of blue cardstock. The medium shade for the main hat, and a lighter and darker shade for the brim of the hat. For the badge, I used some silver mirror cardstock. This police officer will be holding one of the large police lights. This would be sitting on top of his police vehicle. For the base of the light, I used some charcoal colored cardstock, and for the acrylic piece that would go over the light bulb, I used a light gray cardstock. I want to add a little bit of sparkle that would go around the light bulb, so I'm using a clear glitter brush from scrapbook.com, and it'll add this beautiful sparkle. For the light bulb, I used some red iridescent cardstock, so it has a super sparkly look to it. Once the light is assembled, I'll attach the hands, put one on the right and left side, and I will be popping up the light using foam dimension. I'll make sure to add some pieces behind the hands and also the light. Then I'll remove the release paper and attach the light in front of the police officer. Just trying to figure out which direction I want it. Some of the images the gnomes can hold will be so large it covers up their nose. Before adhering the sentiment and the gnome, I first need to attach the stitch circle die cut. I'll put glue on the back and adhere it in place. I will be popping up the sentiment with foam dimension. I'll remove the release paper and adhere the sentiment at the very bottom of the circle die cut. I've already put foam dimension on the back of the police officer, and I'll be adhering him right above the sentiment. The very bottom of his beard was sort of peeking out underneath the light. I thought it looked a little odd, so I did use my scissors to trim it off. Using a white gel pen, I'll add a few highlights on the gnome's nose, feet, his hat, and also the light that he's holding. My pen didn't want to flow very smoothly, so I did scribble it on some scrap paper off screen. Then for a final finishing touch, I'm adding a couple of Love from Lizzie peel-offs. This is the silver mirror color in the mini circle style. I'll put 3 around the gnome police officer. At first I grabbed the silver mini circles, then remembered I need the silver mirror color since it's the same color I used on the background of the card. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 2. For card number 3, I'll be doing a lot of die cut assembly. This card will feature a police officer riding the new motorcycle. And as I mentioned earlier, you will need the original motorcycle die set in order to assemble the police motorcycle. I'm keeping all of my die cut pieces organized in scrapbook.com's stack and sort trays. I have one tray for the gnome and the other for the motorcycle, although I think I did mix up a few of the pieces. For the front shield of the motorcycle, I used black cardstock for that background piece, silver pearlescent cardstock for the very front, and for the piece that goes in the middle, I cut it out of vellum. Now the background piece that I cut out of black cardstock, it does have the windshield area, so I used my scissors and trimmed that off. The only part of the vellum you'll see is that windshield area. The rest will be covered up. So I am able to use glue and I don't have to worry about it being visible on the card. For the handlebars, I used black cardstock, although I probably could have skipped this piece since I used black cardstock for that very background piece. For the light bar that's right underneath the windshield, I used silver mirror cardstock for the main piece, red, white, and blue cardstock colors for the lights. I'll lay out all 3 of those tiny pieces before I start adhering them down. That way I can get them evenly spaced. And since I am using glue, I do have a little bit of wiggle room to get everything adjusted. For the lights of the motorcycle, I use yellow cardstock for that larger center light and white shimmer cardstock for the 2 small circles. Now I'll start working on the main motorcycle body. I use black cardstock for the main piece, black cardstock for the tire, and the body of the motorcycle is blue, although you'll only see a tiny bit of it. Now that larger blue piece is actually the wrong piece. That's the piece that would go if you use the sidecar for the motorcycle, but I'm not going to have the sidecar for the police officer. So I did need to go and cut out another piece. For most of my gnomes and the images, I used scrap cardstock pieces, so I was a little afraid I wouldn't have that same blue cardstock, but luckily I did find a small piece that was just big enough to work for the motorcycle. For the foot stand, I used some gray pearlescent cardstock. With so many teeny tiny die cut pieces, I am using a pair of reverse tweezers. It helps to hold those in place while I add barely art glue on the back side. And I use silver mirror cardstock for the metal pieces in the very front of the bike. So once I have the 2 portions of the motorcycle all assembled, I can attach them together. I did put a little bit of glue on the back, but that wasn't holding it in place. So once I line it up, I'll flip it over and add a piece of double-sided adhesive tape. Once the glue dries, everything will stay together. I do still have a few die cut pieces in my top stack and sort tray, and that's actually for the gnome's feet and legs. So right now the motorcycle is all assembled. This is such a fun design. Jaded Blossom just keeps coming out with more and more fun additions for their gnome sets. And I can't share, but I have seen peeks of some of their upcoming releases as well. They're all amazing. I realized I forgot to cut out the outline piece for both of the legs, although later I will find them in the bottom tray. I went ahead and cut out some new ones from black cardstock. The shoes will be black. I used dark blue cardstock for the gnome's pants, and the soles of the shoes I used some charcoal colored cardstock. If you're making cards to thank your local law enforcement, it's fun that you can customize the different colors so it would match the officers in your area. And I think they would appreciate the card even more if you use the same colors as their uniform and vehicles. Now currently the legs look a little odd, but once they're attached on the motorcycle, it does make sense. Since I want the shoes sitting on top of the little foot stands, I'll flip over the motorcycle, add a piece of double-sided adhesive tape, and that will help hold the shoe and the gnome's knee in place. It'll be much sturdier once I add the foam dimension on the back. Next, I'll attach the hands, and I would recommend adhering them down before adding that front shield piece. Luckily, I was able to peel it up enough to attach the hands. That way the gnome is actually holding the handlebars while riding the bicycle. Now currently the motorcycle looks a little odd. There's hands, legs, feet, but no gnome body. I will be changing that here shortly. This police officer gnome is blonde. I cut out the beard and mustache from some yellow cardstock. I'll attach the nose. Now I'll start working on the helmet. I use black cardstock for that background piece, and you can use any cardstock color for those background pieces since it will be covered up. I have a friend that goes through her scrap cardstock and cuts out a variety of different colors for the gnome body background pieces since all of it is covered up. It's a great way to use up some of that scrap cardstock. I always have tons of scrap cardstock on hand. For the helmet, I'm using the same dark blue color that I use for the gnome's pants. For that narrow strip that goes above the brim of the helmet, I use some silver pearlescent cardstock and silver mirror cardstock for the police badge. Next, I'll attach the helmet onto the gnome. I was trying to decide if I wanted the helmet in front or behind the gnome, but it made more sense to put the helmet in front so it looks like the gnome actually is wearing it. And to hold the helmet in place, I put some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of the gnome's beard and mustache piece. Now I'll add more double-sided adhesive tape on the back. Now I know it's a little weird, this gnome doesn't really have a body. There's legs, hands, there's the gnome's nose, beard, and mustache, but that's it. But we'll just assume that the gnome's body is covered up with the motorcycle, since it has that really wide front shield. Once I figured out the placement for the gnome, so his face is covered up with the little windshield, I'll adhere him in place. And I have all that double-sided adhesive tape on the back side. The leg on the left side didn't look quite right to me, so I am trying to adjust it. Now I'll remove the rest of the release paper, put foam dimension on the back. I've already assembled the background of my card using 2 of the pattern papers from the First Responder collection. The main background is light blue with some tiny white polka dots, and at the very bottom I added a strip of the craft colored pattern paper. After removing the release paper from the foam, I'm still not happy with the legs, especially the one on the left side. It really just looked like it was sort of floating there. So I'm trying to readjust it so it looks like it's actually attached to the gnome. Once I'm happy with the placement of the leg, I'll add the motorcycle gnome on the right side of the card. I've already stamped and cut out the sentiment, "You're Lawsome." I used black cardstock and cut out that second outline piece, layered the 2 together to create a drop shadow. I'll put glue on the back and adhere the sentiment in the upper left-hand corner. For embellishments, I'll be adding 3 silver heart die cuts. I pulled out my little box where I've already gone ahead and cut out lots of the Embellishment Cluster Die cut pieces. I wanted to have some on hand when I needed a quick embellishment. I'm using all 3 of the heart sizes. Since I cut out silver mirror, silver satin mirror, and also silver holographic pieces, I do have to search through each of the little compartments to find the same cardstock finish. I'll put glue on the back and adhere the hearts underneath the sentiment. If you haven't looked into the Embellishment Cluster Die set, I highly recommend it. It's a great way to add paper embellishments to your cards very quickly since you can cut out 6 pieces at once. Now moving on to card number 4, and this time I'll be assembling the police cruiser. And for this vehicle, you will need the original Card Die Cruiser set. I've already gone ahead and cut out most of the pieces. I think I did forget a few, but I'll cut those out later as I'm assembling it. For the very background and the front of the vehicle, I use black cardstock. For the steering wheel, I use light gray cardstock. Next, I'll assemble the light bar. For the very background piece, I use black cardstock. For the background of the light bar, I use white cardstock. And both of these pieces will be covered up, so it really doesn't matter what cardstock color you use. For the base of the light bar, I use some silver satin mirror cardstock. For the red and blue light, I use some iridescent cardstock, so it almost has that look of flashing lights when you move the card. For the center light, I use some white shimmer cardstock. Once I have all of those pieces assembled, I'll put glue at the bottom where that black bar is and adhere it on the back side of the vehicle. And just like that, the cruiser car has been turned into a police vehicle, although I still have quite a few die cut pieces to attach. It's fun that Jaded Blossom included the partition piece. I used some light gray cardstock. There's also a short piece to create the divider. I was ready to attach that piece on the partition, but I wanted to make sure it lined up correctly. So first I put glue around the outside edge of the partition, adhered it on the back side of the window. Now I'll add that narrow little divider on the right side. Next I'll attach the rear view mirrors, and I cut these out from silver mirror cardstock. Right above the rear view mirrors, I'm attaching, I think these are spotlights, and I cut them out from yellow cardstock. Putting just a tiny bit of glue at the bottom so it attaches behind the vehicle. I'll add one on the right and the other on the left side. Now I'll start working on the front of the vehicle. I used black cardstock for the outline piece, silver satin mirror cardstock for the bumper. I believe the two small pieces are more light, and I cut those out from yellow cardstock. For the push bar, I used some dark gray cardstock. And I used the same cardstock color for the right and left side of the push bar. Just put glue on the back and adhere those in place. And to make sure all those die cut pieces line up correctly, I do lift up that background piece. I have a little bit of time to adjust everything before the glue completely dries. Now this piece will be attached to the very front of the vehicle. And this is where I realized I forgot to cut out a few pieces. I also cut the tires out from black cardstock, and there's really no contrast between the tires and the black vehicle, so I did cut out some more tires from some dark gray cardstock. I also cut out the hood of the car from some white cardstock. And I think that really gives it more of a police vehicle look with the black and white. For the front grille, I used some silver mirror cardstock, and I'll adhere it underneath the white hood. Now I'll attach both of the tires. We'll also add some of the front lights. The top headlights, I use yellow cardstock, and for those smaller lights, I use some white shimmer cardstock. I'll adhere the lights of the vehicle down before adding that front push bar. I love the wonky rectangle shape of the top headlights. Now I'll put glue on the back of the final piece and adhere it in front of the car. And I'm trying to make sure to get it centered on the vehicle. So there is the police car all assembled. I will place a large acrylic block on top for some added weight while the glue dries, since I'm using all these different specialty cardstocks. Now I'll set that aside and start working on the background of my card. I'm using more of the blue and white polka dot pattern paper from the Echo Park collection. And I'll be stenciling on the pattern paper using the new handcuff stencil. I cut down the pattern paper piece to A2 size. I have a mini stencil mat, and I'm adding one of Waffle Flower's grip mats. This is the 4 3/4 inch by 6 inch size. And this will help hold the paper and also the stencil in place. As long as you have that little area around your cardstock piece to hold the stencil, it won't move at all. I always test the stencil by pulling it up in one corner. just to make sure it's holding tight. If your grip mat isn't sticky anymore, there are ways to refresh it. I want a very light pattern on the background, so I'm using Distress Oxide Weathered Wood ink color. While stenciling, I did peel back the stencil just to check any areas that I may need to add more ink. If I need to add a little more ink, I can just lay that stencil right back down. I have a piece of black cardstock, and I've cut this down to A2 size. Using a rectangle die, I'll place it on top, run it through my die cut machine, creating a very thin black border. Now I'll put glue on the back and adhere it on my stenciled background. This is a very narrow frame, so I am holding it using my reverse tweezers. Now an easier way would be to cut down that background piece and layer it on the black cardstock, but I wanted to add just that tiny bit of dimension with the black frame. Now I don't have it lined up perfectly. I'll simply use my trimmer and clean up the edges. Just to save time on this video, I've already assembled the next two gnomes, and both of the gnomes will be in the police cruiser. The girl gnome is the police officer, and the boy gnome is sitting behind that partition in the police cruiser. I'll put some double-sided adhesive tape on the back side of the police cruiser. Then I'll remove the release paper. I'll add the police officer down first, and she'll be in front. Part of her little foot stub was sticking outside the vehicle, so I did trim that off. One thing about having the gnomes riding in the vehicles, you don't need to worry about their feet. Now I'll add the boy gnome behind the partition on the left side. I will add a little bit of glue behind the vehicle where it's attached to their hats. That way everything still lays nice and flat. I also placed a large acrylic block on top for some added weight and let that sit for a few minutes. Now with the boy gnome's hat, it does stick off the edge of a horizontal A2 size card. I could turn the card vertically, but I wanted to have a horizontal card. I'm really not worried about it sticking up. It's only about 1/4 of an inch off the edge. I'll just need to use a larger envelope. Now I'll flip over the vehicle, pop it up using foam dimension, and I'll make sure to get good coverage. I also remembered not to put any foam at the very tip of the boy gnome's hat, since it will be off the edge. Now I'll remove the release paper, and I was trying to decide if I wanted the vehicle more on the right, left side, or right in the center. And I figured I would wait before adhering it until I decide where I want to place the sentiment. I've already stamped and cut out the sentiment. You're on my most wanted list. I'll be adding the sentiment on the center of the vehicle right on top of the bumper. Before attaching the sentiment, I realized I haven't attached her hands onto the steering wheel. I'll put some foam dimension just on the back side of her hands, put glue behind the fingertips. I'll add the one hand on the left side first, and I was ready to add the next hand, and I realized I have another left hand, or I guess it would be her right hand. So I had to dig through my Jaded Blossom gnome body parts and find the other hand. Then I'll attach both of the hands on the steering wheel. I'll also pop up the sentiment using foam dimension, and I'm just using the black foam squares since they're sitting on my desk. I'll remove the release paper and adhere the sentiment. Using a white gel pen, I'll add a few highlights on both of the gnomes and also the headlights on the front of the vehicle. Since most of the gnome images are covered up with the vehicle, I'm not adding very many highlight areas. For a little bit of sparkle, I'm using a yellow glitter brush from scrapbook.com and adding it on the front headlights and also the spotlights of the vehicle. And that'll give it just that little bit of sparkle. For embellishments, I pulled out Altenews Enamel Dots. This is their essential black and white set. I'll put 3 dots in the upper left-hand corner and 2 in the lower right-hand corner. For one of the dots, when I peeled it up, the adhesive portion stayed on the packaging, so I did need to add some glue, and I picked up that enamel dot using scrapbook.com's Craft Pro Pick tool. So there is my finished card, and I love how this turned out. I'm not sure the gnome sitting in the back of the police car is very happy though. Now here's another look at the 4 cards I made using Jaded Blossom's brand new June release that's all about law enforcement. If you are interested in any of the products I used in this video, I do have links in the description box below. Jaded Blossom never disappoints with their fun releases, and I love that their products are made here in the US. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.